University. And we are really excited to have you all here with us. And we're also really excited for our panelists, who I will allow to introduce themselves. Martin, would you like to start?
Yeah, sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Martin Petrella. I use he, him pronouns. I'm the Acting Assistant Director for Staff Selection and Training with the Department of Residence Life at Rutgers University. So I oversee all of our recruitment efforts as well as our training and development efforts.
Thank you. Dr. Wilson?
Hi there, I'm Marion Wilson. I'm the Chief Diversity, Equity, Inclusion Officer and Title IX Coordinator at Thaddeus Stevens College of Technology. I've been here about 7 months in that role, but have been in higher education for a very long time. It's nice to see everybody today.
Thank you. Allie?
Hi, everyone. My name is Allie Trignanos. I use she, her, hers pronouns, and I am an area coordinator at Rowan University. I've been here. Next Monday will be two months, so that's exciting. And just recently, I was actually working with Martin at Rutgers University, New Brunswick. So I'm very happy to be here with you all.
Thank you. Ghana?
Hi, I'm Ghana Hilton at Seton Hall University. I'm Director of Scheduling and Operations, which just means that I run 2 event spaces. In that role, I have an assistant director and about 30 student staff. So I hire those 30 student staff. And in my previous life in New York City, I was an HR director for like 20 years, both in not-for-profit and for-profit.
Thank you. And Charlotte?
Hey y'all, my name is Charlotte McLeod-Whitaker. I use she, her pronouns. I am the Director of Residential Education at the George Washington University, which is on the ancestral homelands of the Piscataway and Acostan people. I oversee our hiring, selection, training, and development of our professional and student staff. So I'm excited to be in this conversation in this space with y'all.
Thank you so much, panelists. So sort of the way that we think that this will go is, we have sort of come up with some questions to ask our panelists, and we will sort of ask those questions. The panelists will sort of take turns answering them or agreed with each other. And then at the very end of the session, we will open it up for audience questions and participation. So panelists, what is your role or experience with hiring and interviewing, and how do you make your processes more inclusive and mindful of a spectrum of identities? Who would like to go first?
I can start.
Great.
Yeah, so my role, as I mentioned before, I am responsible for essentially crafting what our hiring process will look like, as well as all of the components of the interviewing, as well as the onboarding process. So I think about this a lot. So I'm really excited to hear what my colleagues do also. So when we're thinking about creating this inclusive process, our stance is that we want candidates to put their best selves forward, right? And so we don't believe in, getting a cutting edge, right? Like we make sure that everyone that is involved understands like what we're asking. And so we do things like talk about the STAR method and do a lot of education pre-interview with our candidates to make sure that they are fully prepared to engage in a conversation as their best selves, right? So I think one of the silver linings of the past few months that we've been encountering this pandemic is we started doing information sessions about the positions that we were posting prior to people engaging in interviews, right? And so part of this also came that GW had a really dramatic shift as it related to the ways in which we changed our service model and our staffing model. And so we wanted folks to be aware of that and understanding what that might look like for them, right? And so we found the informational sessions were super helpful. We send out different books as it relates to our philosophies. We call them lookbooks, they're guides. Lots of people kind of do that. Other things that we've done and relates to making it more inclusive. We do a lot of conversations with our team that's recruiting, right? And so one of the things that our team in preparation of this current structure is we're reading the Debunking the Myth of Job Fit in Higher Education and Student Affairs. And so we pour in a lot in terms of development with the folks who will be recruiting and interacting with our candidates to make sure that they understand a full spectrum of identities. And then with the onboarding process, we do things like creating mentorship programs and different things like that, so that from the moment that they hear about the position up until the moment that they've gotten the position and are in our community, that they're feeling, they at least know one person that's a part of an identity that means something to them. So I'm going to start off there, and I'm happy to jump in later.
Thank you.
I think one of the things that I like to focus on is a really well-written job description. I feel like if you're getting a bunch of candidates that don't quite meet the criteria you think you should have, you need to relook at what you asked for in that initial job description. So that's something I really focus on, and I focus on putting the percentages up front. So if a job is going to be customer service, data management, and something else, like, is it 50% customer service, 75, like what? So when I'm thinking about how I'm writing it, I'll put the highest percentages and emphasize those first, and then the lower things second. And I really I feel like that helps narrow in on what you're really looking for. And it's so important to have that structure, because biases come, I feel, from straying from that. If you're saying you need someone who's really good at Excel and PowerPoint or social media, then race, gender, etc. should not come into that. It should be that skill set. So if you have a really strong job description from the gate, you should be at least going in the right direction.
Hello, everyone. I'll go next. I'm just new to my position here at Thaddeus-Stevens, and I have worked with the team on all of our executive searches. We have a brand new president who's been here just 1 year, and he has mostly hired all new members of the leadership team. And so I participated in all of the process to make sure that we're looking broadly and looking in places that we've not looked or searched before. And I think we're doing a pretty good job. My previous university, where I was for the last 7 years, my office as the equity office reviewed every hire. No process could continue without my team. So the search committee would identify candidates they want to interview, and then they had to send that applicant pool to us. And we would review all of the applicants because we could see the characteristics that they could not see around race, gender, veteran status, disability, all of those things. And where all things were equal and candidates had not been selected for whatever reason, we would add them to the pool, and the search committees were required to interview those candidates with the candidates that they had selected. And in some cases, we would remove candidates that they gave grace or a little space to that actually didn't meet qualifications. So we had the final review of everyone. We also did information sessions for search committees and talked about what was legal, what was fair, what was inclusive, and went through that part of the process with all of our searches, specifically for the executives and faculty, because we were at a large university with I was at a large university with 22,000 students. And so we had a lot of hires throughout the year. And so we needed to create the consistency. And so we worked with the faculty affairs office as well as human resources. They were our business partners. Thanks.
Thank you.
I can share. So in my role, I'm responsible for the recruitment and selection process of our RA staff, which is about just under 300, as well as about 30 part-time graduate interns and about 60 full-time professional staff. And the way that we try to make our processes as inclusive as possible overlaps a lot with what some of the panelists have already said. But what I try to focus in on is both how do you reduce bias coming into your process as much as possible, recognizing that everyone has bias, and it is better to own that and talk about it so that you can have good conversations with the interviewer teams, the search committees, in order to understand your bias and how that might impact how you're viewing candidates and understanding like candidate responses to interview questions. And then very similar to what Charlotte was saying, how do you create a process when a candidate steps in, they have like, there's the least amount of obstacles for them to share their best self. And how we operationalize it is very similar to what a lot of folks were saying around training. How do you review resumes and how do you kind of detach a resume review from the person and more about their experience? And we might talk about that a little bit more, but a lot of the operational pieces are similar to what has been shared, but that's kind of how we organize it.
And I'll just wrap this question up for us, I guess. For me, I'm not necessarily in a role that is in charge of creating the processes for hiring, but I'm in the role where I need to help put this process into work. And so for me, as someone that's part of the operationalization of these processes, it's important for me and the other folks that are interviewing with me is understanding, you know, what was the goal of the processes that were created for hiring, and what are we doing as interviewers to make sure that we're eliminating bias as best as we can. And so a lot of that, like my other panelists have said, is training beforehand. Something that Rowan University does, which I think is really neat, is they do a required search committee training through HR that you have to complete if you're going to be a part of a search committee for the university. So that's just something from my experience, which is pretty cool.
Thank you all so much for contributing. I really appreciate a lot of the themes that are sort of happening in this conversation. You know, Martin, I think that you sort of alluded to what was next. Is there, oh, I have a thing open, okay. Is there a good way to remove bias from resumes based upon name alone? And what systems do you recommend to do so?
I can start just because I know I had mentioned that earlier. In my like perfect world, there would be a way to review resumes and information without names attached. Recognizing, you know, we know that there are a lot of studies that name alone has an impact on someone's ability to get through a resume screening. That is unfortunately not possible where I currently work at Rutgers, just the way that our applicant tracking system is set up, both for our students and for our professional staff members. There's just not an easy way to do it. So for both our student and our professional positions, we've tried to really utilize like a very standardized like screening rubric for all of our positions. And so looking at position descriptions, what we know that we want, listing out like, here are the specific criteria and experiences we're looking for. And then we put that into Qualtrics or another electronic system, and then have the folks who are reviewing resumes, cover letters, or other application materials fill out that form or that rubric for every candidate. And I found that that kind of reduces bias, because you're no longer looking at like, oh, let me look at this resume. Oh, this is good. Oh, this is bad. And then it goes into like a yes pile or a no pile, but really forces the reviewer to drill down on the specific experiences, which we know doesn't remove all bias, but we found does tend to lead to a more inclusive or diverse candidate pool, because we've kind of taken out some of the identity piece and more focused on like, do they have the skills, experiences that we're looking for in order to be successful in whatever position that we're searching for.
Thank you, Martin.
So something that I think is really cool is that this upcoming search process for our undergraduate RAs, we've actually eliminated the need for a resume for our application. So that is one way that we're taking that kind of bias out. We know that a lot of our applicants for RA positions, this may be their first job, this is their first job application. And we have seen that some resumes may not be what one would expect potentially. And so there can be a lot of bias based on just how someone built a resume on what they hope a resume should look like for this job. So it's very exciting. My colleague Hannah Moore is on this call, and she's one of the people that did that. So it's very exciting, and I'm definitely intrigued to see how it sets up our search process for this upcoming year.
I'll go next. You tell folks repeatedly, focus on competencies and not on titles and names. Compare the competencies to what we're actually looking for. And in the sessions that where folks are required to have the training before they can participate on the search committee, we will give them samples of resumes and have them look at 2 different resumes with different type names on them and ask them what candidate they'd send forward for us to interview. And typically, if we use a name that perhaps sounds more ethnic, sometimes folks will pick it apart, and I remind them, go back and look at the competencies. And then, because traditionally the competencies are absolutely comparable on both resumes, where they would have screened someone out with a name that is less familiar or comfortable for them. So we work on that repeatedly in the information sessions that we did.
Oh, I have to jump in on this one. Thank you, Marion, for that good setup for me, because I've dealt with this my entire life on both sides, having an unusual name that I think shows as ethnic, and also being the one to scan through resumes. So as everyone has said, yes, you look at the competencies, not where they live, not what their name is, not what you assume their gender or marital status or whatever is. That's where a lot of people get into trouble. They've done studies, I'm sure you've seen them on TV, that if my name was Donna Smith and I sent my resume to 100 companies, and then my name is Ghana Hilton and I send it to the same 100, I get a different response. So obviously bias is real. And I've even had people recommend that I put a fake name on a resume, recommend that I don't give my children unusual names so that that won't happen to them, etc. And I find that very interesting. I think we should lean in. We're such a victim blaming country. I think we should lean in on where the issue stems from. They need to accept me being named Ghana, right? So because my parents named me after an African country for a very specific reason, this is how I've always felt. And if anyone on the call has ever gone through this on the other side, please know you only need one job. So if Donna applies to 100 and gets 75 responses, and Ghana applies to 100 and only gets 25, you don't want to work for the 50 that didn't want you because your name is Ghana, right? They did you a favor. So if they don't want you because you're too Black, too ethnic, too whatever the issue is, once that other person, Donna, who happens to be Black, goes to the interview, if they didn't want Ghana because she's Black, they're not going to want Donna because they find out she's Black when she gets to the interview. She gets the interview, but she doesn't get the job. So it doesn't matter. We're still on equal footing, because if that is what the bias was about, okay? You don't want to work at those companies. So as Ghana, the 25 who asked me to come in already accept the Ghana that you see before you. And that's where you want to work. And like I said, you only need one offer that you want to accept. So never feel complicit with that kind of bias. Just go to who welcomes you, and you will find an opportunity, as George Stephanopoulos did, as Barack Obama did, as all the other famous people that that have names that maybe don't roll off the tongue as fast as Donna or Julie. So never let that intimidate you, because the people who call you back accept you for who you present yourself to be on that piece of paper.
Kind of got me hype. I really enjoyed that. Thank you so much for that. I echo what my colleagues have said. I think the only things I would add is that we really were intentional with building a partnership with our HR business partner and helping them understand what those processes are, right? And so as it relates to the system of removing names and some of those different things, they're very helpful in that process of figuring that out. I would say the other thing that we spend a lot of time in our training sessions is talking about cultural alignments and cultural additions, right? And so a lot of our pre-work really deals with who are we as an organization and as a team, and who do we want to be, and really focusing on how, instead of worrying from a deficit model, right? Like, how are we looking at candidates from like, this is a cultural piece that we're lacking, whether it be lived experiences or ways of thinking and knowledge, right? Like, this is a cultural thing that either aligns with who we are as an organization and has similar values, or maybe doesn't align with necessarily who we see ourselves as an organization, but will get us to that level of preeminence that we're looking for, right? And so I think when we started having those conversations, people stopped trying to look for the bad in candidates. I think that I got into this work really passionately because I have had some unfortunate interactions as it relates to the hiring process, right? And so once people stop looking for, well, this candidate doesn't have this candidate doesn't have that, we started looking at like, what does this candidate have that will really, take our team to a different level? Like, who does this candidate connect with that no one else on our team is able to really reach, right? And from our student population, how does this candidate question or challenge us in ways that we need to be challenged, right? And really finding ways to celebrate that. And so I think that when I think about systems, I think of the system of how this whole deficit mindset around like, well, this person doesn't have this experience, this person doesn't have that experience. Not only using this idea of what are your transferable skills, but also like how are those skills that they might not have something that we really need to consider as a team. So I found that to be helpful. Yeah, I'll stop because that was great. Everyone else said amazing things.
What are some common accessibility issues that can be forgotten when it comes to the whole hiring process in its entirety?
A couple of things that come to mind. One is like, where are you doing these interviews? If I know the pandemic has forced a lot of us to do things virtually and hire virtually, but are you in a position where all of your candidates have access to internet? Do they have devices that allow them to do these virtual interviews? When you're in person, are you in a building that has accessible entrances and can get you to the different floors or spaces you need? Is the furniture that you're using in those spaces accessible to all body types? Like, there's a lot of things when you think about accessibility that often people push to the side, and then we're focusing on, well, did we ask good questions? But then there's so much more to the interview than just the questions that you're asking. Another thing that's like very salient for me, so I have ADHD, and my brain does not intake and process information as a normal neurotypical brain might. So for me, it's actually incredibly hard to remember what someone just said 2 seconds ago from their mouth if it's not in front of me. So I really appreciate, one, that we have our panel questions here on screen, but that's one reason why I advocate for providing interview questions either in advance or providing a copy to the candidate during the interview, because whether it's like a neurodivergency or maybe English as a second language, there's so many barriers that not providing questions can put up, and it can be resolved by just giving the questions either in advance or in the interview. So those are a couple of things that I think of in terms of accessibility.
I will say one of the things that has concerned me as a person who has a physical disability on campuses when they suggest we do a campus tour. that one, there's not curb cuts always, or one that even though there are folks who don't have an assistive device, that they don't plan for somebody who can't walk the distance of your campus, and those considerations. Another thing is when we do these Zoom interviews, we don't always have the best technology that are so that, you know, folks have what they need, and you know, whether it's, you know, different kinds of captioning and those kinds of things. And we just assume that everyone is able-bodied and that they have the same sensory skills. And so we don't plan or anticipate. One of the things that we had a director of ADA who reported through my office, and he reached out to every candidate via email where it was appropriate, and on the phone for particularly some of our entry-level positions, to ask whether there was any accommodation. And since we ask everyone, no, people got so excited that they asked ahead of time before we either brought them to campus or were online with a candidate. And so some of those things really have made a difference.
Those are all fantastic points. Thank you so much for bringing them all up. I think sometimes we forget about the accessibility piece of an interview, so thank you all. What are some tips that we have seen campuses implement, including turning off Zoom cameras to avoid bias, having interviews share pronouns if comfortable, pointing out all gender restrooms if in person, and etc. Has your office implemented any of these, or do you have any other like best tips or practices to share with us today?
I think one thing that when we look at our hiring practice and decide what's legal, what's best for our institution, what's best for, you know, us, is that we just kind of document it and keep it consistent. Inconsistencies in an institution are really harmful. That one person is asking for one thing and another is asking for something else. A quick little checklist in addition to the legal things that we need to know about, like the obvious, not asking if somebody's married or has kids or is pregnant or is whatever. But also, I love, for instance, the instance where Dr. Wilson, you said they called to see, do you have any accommodations that we need to meet? Well, then that should be for everyone, just to send that in there. Oh, if you have any accommodations, please let us know in this way by this time so we can try to meet that. That's something great that could be a tip, but it should go across the board. And I think that's really, really important.
I really appreciate you saying that, Ghana, because one thing that I've noticed, like in this role, is that we have, or at least what I'm experiencing and trying to adjust, is we have like different levels of like how, like what work are we going to do to be inclusive for professional staff versus student staff. And so there are things that we may do for professional staff candidates that like don't cross our mind for students or vice versa. And so trying to make that consistent. So any role that you're applying for in our organization, regardless if you are a new RA or like one of our senior level directors, you're having some consistent experience, both in terms of like your time with us and then our ability to make sure that we're doing things consistently across the board in our hiring decisions and our practices. So thank you for saying that, because that's something that we like are trying to figure out, especially because our organization is so large and spread out. And for those who have any affiliation with Rutgers, know like there's like 75 places to get 75 different answers for the same question. So, and then one other thing that I wanted to say that I should have said in the last question is something that we've been working towards is some of like how we're making our like marketing for these positions the most accessible. And so we're finding that we are working with students and some candidates with visual impairments or differing abilities to see, especially on a screen. And so up until a few years ago, we were doing a lot of marketing through like PDF, Word documents that we were emailing out to people. And so we've made a concerted effort over the past few years to try and move all of our marketing for all of our positions onto our website, which has a lot more accessible features for folks who use screen readers and other additions or add-ons to their browsers in order to be able to get access to all of our information about our positions. And so all of our candidates have the ability to do the best possible research for the position and before their interview. And that's something that I didn't even think about until I stepped into this role, and then was able to move that ahead. So that's something that we've also been working with.
Thank you for sharing.
I think similar to some of the questions around like what types of like what accessibility needs, one of the things that we do particularly around the on-campus part of the interview is rather than doing some type of campus tour or what have you, we do this survey to ask them what components or aspects of the institution or the city do you want to hear more about to make an informed decision? So in the past, candidates have said, I really want to talk to someone else that has children, right? And know what does it look like to like live on campus and have children. Other folks have asked about different opportunities with different offices, or maybe there is a graduate program because we offer tuition remission that they're interested in doing. And so based off of that information, we really try to think about who are the people that are involved in their interviews, and also like what are the opportunities for them to know more about those offices or those departments as they're thinking about, could I envision myself here? Another thing that I do, and I forgot who mentioned it, but around consistency, but it's making me think for the assistant directors that usually apply for our positions, we do a peer space, and it is a space that there is no necessary questions that are specific, right? They don't, there's no rubric that's attached. It's specifically for the candidate to be able to talk to their peers in a way to know what does it mean to be a mid-manager here, and what does that culture look like? And so I think as we think about bias and being inclusive, I think it then goes back to like, what is the experience that you're creating for a candidate, right? Like what this idea of not only are we interviewing you, right, but you are making a life decision of deciding to be a part of our community, right? And so I've noticed that those touches have made people feel more confident, not only in their decisions, yeah, absolutely, I can absolutely share that survey, but not only confident in their decisions, but taking away, I've noticed there's a lot of conversations around imposter phenomena, right? And this idea, and I notice that a lot with the candidates that apply. And so anything that we can do to kind of challenge those feelings, right? Like, and what that looks like becomes really important. And so making folks being able to say, like, not only do you belong here if you choose to, right? But we want you here, right? Like you can offer something to our community that we don't necessarily have. And so those have been helpful ways to really, I think, put the candidate at ease, but also really acknowledge that like they have identities and they have interests in other parts of their selves that also need to feel comfortable with that type of decision.
Charlotte, that is amazing. I actually had that done to me here. And it's one of the reasons I chose Seton Hall. After I met with who would become my bosses, they had set up meetings with people of my same title. So I met with 3 or 4 people and got to just ask them questions and talk about what's their day to day and how things are for them and why do they love it here. And it was amazing. And I really enjoyed that part of the process. And I enjoyed the fact that they had thought ahead to, hey, let's let Ghana talk to what would become some of her peers. So that's a really a great point. And it works because I'm here. So I also wanted to just add very quickly that when I was not in a university setting, but I'm sure this can apply in some ways. We used to post our jobs. I was at United Way of New York City, and we used to post our jobs on like the classic kind of what we would be like Indeed or just certain standard places that you know you're going to post your job. But my boss and I had relationships with other organizations that would be happy to post. So it was like the Asian American blah, 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 the Jamaican blah, blah, blah association, the disability differently abled blah, blah, blah. They had job posting boards that were free, that when we went to New York Times and Indeed and whatever, we would also send it to them. So just it widened our pool in such, and that was in New York City. So of course we had access to that, but create relationships and pools outside of your normal so that when it's posted on your website, then you can take that link and say, hey, we just posted another job, send it to your networks, and it will be into those different kinds of, like a women's business club network or this network or the fraternity and sorority Greek life network or whatever. And that kind of gives you a wider pool in which to draw from.
The tips that you all have given, I think, have been fantastic. Thank you all so much for sharing them. That is it for the formal questions that Amanda and I sort of came up with for our panelists. I can't really see anybody but our panelists, but if there are any audience questions, please feel free to unmute yourself and ask them or drop them in the chat.
As folks are thinking, I actually have one thing that I've been sitting with as I've been hearing all this great advice. And I know it was mentioned, I think it was Charlotte actually that said about working with your HR partners. If you're, for example, I'm not at a level where I am in charge of searches, or this isn't really something in my area. So do you have any suggestions for getting, I guess, that buy-in from others to be able to make changes like this, to do some of these things about screening processes and removing names and sharing questions ahead of time? It just seems like that's something that I know I'd love to advocate for, but I'm not sure how to get that process rolling for my institution. So any advice that any of the panelists have for that would be super appreciated. And I'm sure others on the call are like, this is great, but how do I get people to do it?
I can start off for me, and then folks feel free to chime in. I think that we've been fortunate to it hasn't required a ton of pushing necessarily, right? Or folks getting on board. I think everyone has seen between what's happening in the world, right? I think that has, it's hard to really talk about, having to people that I've been working with kind of understand, like, okay, we need a diverse staff, right, in order to connect with our students in the ways in which they're needing us, right? I think some of the more unconventional, I'll use, ideas that I've had were backed up by research, right? And so when you look at research that's coming out of different think tanks or different companies, right? Like, it is showing that the way to have successful teams, right, are diverse teams, right? Teams that are coming from different perspectives. And so I think a good example is the idea around removing names. There is a lot of research around what that looks like through the process, right? Or the bias that is related there. I think the other thing, I'll give another example. One of the things I thought a lot about, if people have research around this, is that not only is it the name, but it's really the institution that you went in, if we're talking about higher education and student affairs, right? So candidates that worked at similar institutions to me or went to similar graduate programs to me, it's the halo effect, right? Like, I am more likely to decide that I like them, and then just the rest of their process, I'm just reinforcing that based off of different nuggets, right? So one of the things I'm currently trying to explore is it any way that we can remove the institutions right, from some of that screening process, right? Because there is an innate thing that happens in higher education and student affairs, but the data isn't necessarily there in the same ways, right? And so that type of push will look a little different than, having the data to show, like, these are the best practices, and not just within student affairs and higher education, but within business, right? Across different industries, right? Because I think everyone wants to have, well-functioning teams. And I think the way that you do that is through the things that we're talking about today. So.
Thank you.
There is a question in the chat. Marion, what would you say were the positive and areas of improvement for having the applications come through the equity office?
So initially, when candidates applied, they applied through our HR portal or with the assistance from someone in HR. And whoever the faculty search chair, we would give them access. So that the committees would initially screen all of their applicants, all the applicants, and decide the candidates that they wanted to interview. But before they interviewed, because somebody just mentioned the halo effect, they would choose candidates who were just like them. My office had access to, I would always say, the behind the scenes information. And so when it came through us, if there was a candidate who was comparable to who met all the qualifications and was comparable to the candidates that they wanted to interview, but it appeared based on their years in service, it might be their age, their race, their gender, their disability, veteran status, whatever that characteristic was, they were not screened out by the search committee. And so it was an advantage, I will say, in the state that I was in Tennessee, particularly for veterans, because that was a vet-friendly state. When we would add a veteran that they didn't realize was a veteran, they would get excited. Oftentimes when we added someone, they were looking for oftentimes younger, in some cases, candidates. And other times they were looking for folks with much more experience. And so sometimes they would screen people out based on what they could see on that resume. And we were the second set of eyes always to make sure that really strong candidates were not screened out based on any area that was protected by law. And so because that was required for every search, people didn't complain about it. I understand before I arrived, they did complain, but I had to strengthen my team to make sure we were consistent in our reviews. And then it just became business as usual, which was what we'd hoped for.
Also, really quick, I noticed, Nyla, if you're still here, you had asked someone about sharing the survey. Do you know what panelist that question was for and what survey you're talking about? Do any of the panelists remember sharing a survey?
Yeah, I reached out to them. Yeah,
oh, awesome.
We're gonna email.
Cool. All right, yeah, Nyla says Charlotte, she did awesome. Just want to make sure we covered that. Thank you.
It looks like there's another question in the chat. It looks like it's for the entire panelist group. What are some ideas you have to best set up staff for long-term retention success? We can successfully hire diverse teams, but I'm not sure the institution does a good job at helping them with long-term success. Ghana has her hand up. She was ready.
It's a pet peeve of mine, so I'm glad for a panelist, for an audience member bringing it up. Onboarding is everything. You get a great person in and then you don't onboard them properly. You may not have them as long as you want them. So there's a couple of things. I'll just speak very quickly about some things that I did that I found success with. But again, the consistency, everyone should have a similar onboarding experience. And that's tricky if they're going to different areas. So for our division, we tried to standardize our process and say, make sure they have these things. So I, at previous jobs and at this job, have a list. This is their first, this is before they come. You have their computer, you have their name on their door, you have a welcome sign for them, you have ordered their business card, like little things that people may forget is just a checklist. I recently hired an assistant director, and when she came in, she had everything, including her welcome, with her name on it, and she just loved that. So I have the pre-work that has to happen, and then what their first day should be like, and then I have first week, first month, and then first 3 months, and then I stop after that, because pretty much a really good it should automatically feed into however your annual reviews are. So however the touch base is set up for that, it should feed into that process. So at the bottom of my new assistance checklist, it says 6 month for our half year and then 1 year for our it kind of gives those dates ahead of time so that she anticipates what's going to happen and how it's going to go down. At my last job, not here, we had a buddy program. I had and it's probably a nicer way to say that, but we had a buddy in your department and then a buddy outside of your department. So for instance, if you're in housing, I picked a great person in housing that could show the best of us, because that's important, to be a person's buddy and say, welcome, here's where the coffee maker is, here's where the restrooms are, here's where your desk is. If you need anything, this is where we keep our supplies. But I would also put them with somebody from advancement or somebody from admissions. That would be their other buddy. And I would make sure that we had a very small budget, and we would say, here's money to just take them to the cafe so that they would have a lunch date with that buddy. That buddy would take them around the campus, show them other departments. Oh, you're going to be working a lot with PR and communications, or, oh, you're going to be working a lot with student services, and kind of get them out of the housing office and to see a few things on campus. And this is where this is and this. And because I'm at a Catholic university, we say, this is the chapel. And the people are like, oh, that's so beautiful. They don't get out to see those things until much later. So we want to have a buddy inside to show them the ropes where they are, and then a buddy on the outside of that department to help them with campus life. So I think that's very important. And then just follow up with those meetings and dates, touch base with them. Orientation is on there. So when HR sent me their orientation date, I put that on the list. But it was also, oh, we're going to see these buildings. Oh, this day we're going to do these things. So I already had it sketched out, and it helps so much. People can look at the sheet, know what's expected of them, know what they're going to do for those first few months. And I think it anchors them here. So that's my few tips on onboarding, but strong onboarding is everything.
Donna, people are asking you to share that checklist, write an article for our magazine.
I will say something, Ghana, that sold me on my last institution. In the interview, they asked me, is there anything that I really like to do for fun? And I told them I was a sports fan. My first day, they had a jersey for me from the team, from our campus team. And somebody had asked me whether I was interested in going to one of our team's baseball games that first week. And I was hooked after that. So that onboarding is just really, really important. And, when I walked in and saw a jersey laying on my desk, and they appropriately sized it for me.
Yeah, I would echo everyone else's. So we have a checklist that I think from an administrative standpoint is helpful. I think a majority of our staff live on campus, right? So this idea of living where you work can be really challenging. And so throughout the onboarding process, we do a few things. First, there is a online module that everyone in our department takes, and it's just about the culture, right? So what are our values? How do those values manifest in our work? What are some of the, guiding things? And the reason why we did an online module is because we wanted people to be able to paste that information in the ways that makes most sense for their learning styles. We also do the buddy system. I would strongly encourage folks to do that if that's not something that they do, because it allows them to have an informal space to ask those questions that they might not feel necessarily comfortable with asking their supervisor or other people, right? So how do you get the printer to work? Or some of those different things that, if their supervisor might have went through with them, they might not feel necessarily comfortable going through that again. And I know I mentioned this in the beginning, but what we did last cycle is that we worked with our Office of Diversity, Equity, and Community Engagement to identify mentors across the campus. And the way that we did that is that we asked all of our new hires, what are salient identities that you would like to be paired with? And so we worked with that office to find different mentors, and the mentors have 3 touch points. And so they do a welcome email, introducing themselves, talking about different restaurants or different things like that. They would talk about the city, talk about GW. The second thing is that there was some type of meeting right before move-in. That's a huge day for us. in residence life, right? And so having that time before all of the things started to kick off. And then they do an end of the semester kind of check-in with their mentor. And so what we found is that, you know, staff who we didn't traditionally have those different identities, the entire university has been really helpful in welcoming those students or welcoming those staff members and helping to kind of make sense of what it means to be at an institution like this. And so that's been really helpful. And I'm happy to share any of those things also. But yeah.
Are there any other questions for our wonderful panelists? Seeing none, hearing none. You know, thank you all so much for joining us today. You know, Amanda puts together these webinars once a month, right, Amanda? Once-ish a month, something along those lines.
Yep.
And
we're
so if
gonna-
some,
Oh, sorry. And Allie's team, actually Allie's here too, and her team's going to be taking them over shortly. I can say that for next month, December, we have a Makuho member who's going to give us some knowledge and resources about being inclusive regarding a whole bunch of faith traditions, especially around the month of December. So I'm excited to see how that's going to come together, and that's what we're looking at for next month. But sorry, go ahead, Jess. I just wanted to say that Allie's going to be helping out and doing a lot more moving forward.
so we look forward to that with Allie. And if you are, you know, Makuho is our professional home. So if you haven't gotten involved with us, the website is linked here. The Mid-Atlantic Placement Exchange will be happening in February in Reading, Pennsylvania. The information is on our website, which I just sort of took a screenshot of. If anybody actually needs a link, just, you know, send me an email and I can send it to you. Thank you all so much for joining us today. I hope that you all have a lovely week and, you know, happy short week at work for hopefully all of us.